Okay, here I am, Charles Eisenstein with Sayer G again. And I say again, not because you've heard us before, but because we've tried a few times now to record and something always went wrong. We're joking that the Illuminati are interfering with us.
Well, it's Mercury retrograde, right?
And it's Mercury retrograde, yeah. and it's 5G, and Vladimir Putin is in it on it too. So
bots, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we've got lots of excuses, but here we are today. Sayer is the founder and operator of Green Med Info, which is one of the biggest alternative health websites. And his new book is called Regenerate. And I kind of know him more as a friend and somebody who I feel like, like one of those people where like you get together and you're almost tripping over yourselves because there's so much to talk about. That's kind of how I experienced Sayer. So welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Charles. Same here. You came to my wedding and I really wanted to talk with you. And it was the same thing. I was just like, well, I wish we could talk about these 20 things, but I have to go hang out with other guests and get married. So
right.
This is our opportunity. This is our quality time.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so much we could talk about. But maybe we can start with, because this is happening in beginning of March 2020. So the coronavirus is on everybody's minds. I wrote an essay and I didn't publish, and I probably won't publish about it. For one thing, it felt like pitching a tent in a storm. Like anything I say is just going to get swept away in the hysteria. And I kind of don't want to get crucified. And also, I don't know, I felt that there was a little bit in it, in me, of kind of crusading against the crusade, which is actually more of a crusade. So I don't know, I still might publish it or rewrite it or something. But I'm curious, Sayer, I have like this kind of bird's eye view of it. You're way more knowledgeable about disease and physiology and so forth. So I'm really curious what you think about it. I mean, there's all these theories out there, it's actually 5G, or it's a genetically modified bioweapon, or it's a hoax entirely, and then there's the mainstream narrative and variants of it. There's so much, it can be really confusing.
Yes.
So aside from like staying away from Corona beer, what advice could you give, or what's your take on it?
Wow. Well, I love what you said as far as pitching a tent in a storm. And I've been in a similar place. If I wasn't focused so much on other things that are really in a way for my own well-being, the Regenerate book and project was really about me trying to focus on something other than, your yearly plague that's being marketed as going to kill us all. Because we've seen this with so many previous examples of swine flu and bird flu and Ebola and Zika. It's just amazing, really. And I'm not saying that there isn't a real threat, but I do feel that I'm also not wanting to jump into the frying pan right now, because I think that what you said in a conversation that we had the other day, which I think everyone should be listening to this and focusing on this point, is that there is a layer of reality, if not a very definition of reality, where in a way mutually exclusive points of views or truths coexist. And that sounds absurd. And yet I don't really know any way to describe what's going on beyond affirming what you pointed out. So I know that sounds abstract, but I think that right now, yes, there's a potential that this coronavirus was somehow anthropogenically manipulated in let's say a laboratory. Could be bioweapons, maybe not. Maybe they were doing something aspirational, like trying to save the world by producing some new vaccine against the common cold virus. Very doubtful. If you go to the CDC website, you see that it is basically coronavirus before the patented form. It's novel, right? According to them, was just the common cold, basically. So we're in a situation now where we really don't know who to believe or what to believe, but I'm very curious about what you've written. So I would like to ask you a little bit about what you think, and then we can maybe just dovetail off that.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose I'll come out of the closet about it. What strikes me is that the most dangerous virus is the virus of fear that
Mhm.
rides atop the coronavirus. And it's striking, like, even if there isn't a conspiracy to use this as a way to implement social controls and abridgment of civil liberties, when you are, how the saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Or if you're really good with a hammer, then you're always looking for nails.
Mm.
So here is a threat that finally the authorities know what to do about, because they don't know what to do about, and neither does the public know what to do about autoimmunity, depression, suicide, opioid addiction, alcoholism, and so on, which are killing orders of magnitude more people than the coronavirus. Like, they have no idea what to do about these things. The tidal wave of anxiety and depression, for example, and addiction. So you don't, there's no state of emergency declared about this.
Mm. Mm.
But now here comes something that the technologies of control can actually do something about.
Yes.
So finally, we get to here's a threat that we can address with quarantines, with vaccinations, with controlling people's movements, forced medical examinations, um, travel bans, et cetera, like, so even if it wasn't a conspiracy, the authorities are like almost happy. And I'm not saying that they are taking pleasure in people's suffering at all, but it's kind of validating. And as for the public, it's kind of the same thing. Here's a proxy for all of our nameless, unspeakable fears and our sense of being out of control and helpless. If we focus all of those onto this thing that we can understand, like, this is something that the public mind can understand, a disease caused by a pathogen that is a threat to us, and we have to win a war against this bad thing. Like,
Yes.
that's a basic mind form that everybody's comfortable with, and so we know what to do, and so it gets elevated in the public discourse.
Mm.
So that's essentially, and then I guess what else I was saying in the essay is, as we take a step, one after another step, and you mentioned like Zika, and all these other diseases, like, are we really wanting to go to a world where we no longer congregate in public because we're afraid to, where sports events are talking about banning, like, not having the Olympics, like they're banning all these events. I think Switzerland or something banned any public gathering of over 1,000 people. People are talking about having virtual meetings instead of real meetings. Conferences are being canceled.
Exactly.
I could see a world where it is unthinkable that you would go out to a bar or go out to a public place and actually interact with other people without wearing, a hazmat suit or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, is that really where we want to go? And why is security and safety so overridingly important? Is life just to survive? Is there a balance to be struck between risk and security in the name of fun, of exploration, of development? So these are the things that I've been thinking about.
I love it. This is absolutely essential, because there is a biopolitical substrate, to the surface narrative that has been unfortunately amplified virally around the world, primarily through mainstream media. But I think hybrid and alternative media is now joining in reifying what is, really an invisible threat, right? It's not that different from in the Middle Ages when demons used to plague people. Now, there are reasons why those behaviors appeared to involve demons. It could have been ergotized bread. We now know there's sort of an explanation, but there were very psychosomatic or psychogenic processes at play, and they still are. And so the meme that you're addressing of fear as a vector itself, in a way, of inexorable debility and maybe even lethality, is powerful, because in those videos of the Chinese spraying their entire populations with military style, biocidal agents, how are they determining what is caused by immunotoxicity and suppression from the chemical and what is caused by one of probably trillions of viruses in the environment we're exposed to daily? It's absolutely absurd. Unless you run the PCR testing, in real time to determine, whether there is actually evidence of some type of viral overgrowth within a body. And even then, you can't prove that it's caused anything. All disease is multifactorial. It's just rather absurd from the perspective of what you might call the new biology, meaning post-2000 is when we discovered the microbiome. It was an event horizon, after which we had to acknowledge that there really is no other when it comes to germs, because we're primarily comprised of them. If we look at the definition of what we are through the lens of how many protein coding genes we contain within the eukaryotic nucleus, 99-fold more is contributed by viruses, bacteria, fungi, helminths, right? So the absurdity, of germ theory vis-a-vis the discovery of the holobiont, which is what we essentially are, which is a near infinite number of microorganisms somehow that we experience as ourselves, it totally in a way implodes or challenges the psyop that I think we're both seeing run right now. So it just stimulates so many thoughts in me as far as what we're actually experiencing right now. But one thing that you really hit on, which is when we had the, Patriot Act post 9/11, and it was endless war, right? Terrorists are everywhere, and we're going to preemptively, basically run illegal wars in places overseas that just happen to be on top of oil that we want. This is transmogrified or sublimated into what we're presently seeing as the same psyop, because they can preempt sovereign states' rights and invade anyone's soils under the auspices of saving their lives from a deadly threat that, again, is invisible. They're doing it in Africa with Ebola. Now we're seeing this sort of like a test in a way to see how far they can push it. I thought they were going to contain it in China, but it's definitely gone global. And here's the real challenge, is that they're giving all these conspiracy theorists fodder, fuel. Like in October, was it 2019, they ran this massive Hollywood-style event called Event 201. John Hopkins, the World Economic Forum, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation ran a fake pandemic that was scripted to kill 61 million people around the world, implode the economy, require military intervention, and it was from a coronavirus infection. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, everyone can Google it. Go to Event 201. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I like to put little facts together and connect the dots like you do. But, oh, my Lord, we're really in it right now, Charles.
Uh-huh. Wow. So, yeah, a couple things to say about that. One is, the basic thought forms underneath the war on terror are very similar to the thought forms underneath the war on fill in the blank. And especially if it's this global insidious thing that you have to have special instruments to detect, and it can sneak in under any barrier, like there's no limit to the amount of control that's necessary to keep it out. And just like terrorism, it never goes away. It's not like you defeat Hitler and the war is over, because terror is a concept. How do you win a war against a concept? It's a strategy. Terrorism is a strategy. How do you win a war against a strategy? And in a similar vein, infectious disease, the possibility of it is always there. So that's why I'm a little concerned that the measures that are being taken to prevent the spread of coronavirus will become permanent, because the rationale for them will always be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened was in 2001, right, there was the Model States Health Emergency Powers Act that was drafted somewhere in Georgia that gave like a template for states to basically replicate like Alec, just, like a bill mill. And what it did was it enabled states to call what is essentially a martial law effect into being in cases of there being some type of infectious disease. And then it was, I think, 2009 when Bush wrote in executive orders making it equivalent to being almost a bioterrorist to be infected with a novel form of H1N1. And it's an interesting word, novel. It's like you think of a novel, right? It's fiction, and it really refers to a story being written that is absolutely not based on evidence. It's really more like theater, So I just would say that what we're seeing here is the state laying claim, sort of like through a new ontology on the bodies of everyone that can be infected by some, again, invisible agent. So it's a form of, I think, redeclaring the human body as chattel, and the state as the owner. So that's kind of what I'm seeing here, but, I'd like your opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you could certainly see it that way. It's what rights are circumvented or declared null and void because there's a war on. This happens in war too. Like civil liberties are abridged during a war because the important thing is the war effort to defeat the enemy. And then after we've done that, then we can talk about civil liberties. So same thing, like, okay, yes, freedom of association, yes, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, et cetera, but right now there's something more important. So the authorities that would like to maintain control like it if there's something that comes along, even if they didn't machinate it themselves and create it themselves, they naturally gravitate toward any narrative that validates the abridgment of civil liberties and personal freedoms, because it gives them license to do what they're good at in a way. And they're doing it with all good intentions, I think, or a lot more good intentions than conspiracy theorists ascribe to them.
Wait, you're talking about me?
Yeah, it's to protect us,
Yeah.
But here's one more thing I noticed about the similarity between, okay, and before I even say this, like, I could be totally wrong. This could be like a dangerous epidemic that's going to kill tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people.
Right.
That could happen. So far, it doesn't actually look that way, compared to the flu. It seems more virulent, but there's the matter of undocumented cases. If you compare people who actually go to the hospital, then flu is more lethal.
Well, and there's always been question about whether the statistics that are officially released are accurate. And I don't know that that's so much conspiracy theory as just how do you validate, the cause of an illness and just attribute it as, like the Koch postulate to a single, disease.
Right. So that's a whole other thing. I mean, we can go there, but I just wanted to finish this thought, which is simply that another similarity between terrorism as the reason to suspend certain rights and freedoms and coronavirus, the similarity is that in the end, neither of them actually turn out to be that serious. Like after 9/11, it didn't take that long before people stopped being terrified of terrorism, didn't really believe it anymore, didn't believe that there was much of a threat. And I wonder if that's going to happen with these infectious diseases, which, when we get warned again and again and again, like remember with terrorism, there was the red alert and the amber alert, we're on amber alert, Maybe at the beginning, people were like, oh my God, amber alert. Oh no. But after amber alert had been going on for a few years, people didn't actually believe it. And one got the impression that the authorities didn't believe it either. Now, right now, we're kind of in the 9/11 aftermath, like the stage of the infectious disease terror alert, where people are scared, not quite as scared as the press is, But, people are concerned, like it's working, kind of like 9/11 was working to terrify people.
Mhm.
Um, and again, like we could go into various theories of 9/11 and these competing narratives, um, but it's kind of working. But I just wonder, you know, I think fundamentally the age of infectious disease is over, and that humanity faces totally different challenges than we faced in the 18th and 19th century.
Mm.
Um, but as it plays out, and it turns out not to confirm the alarms. I mean, some of the alarms are alarming, but it plays out. It doesn't confirm those. Are people going to become inured to
Right.
this? Is it really going to work? In other words, from the perspective of those who would like to,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, I love where you're going with this, because I think you're probably right about us transitioning to an age where, infection isn't the primary concern, or there's more complexity there. But I would say that what I feel is happening in the sort of movement of historical moments to this moment is that we had a nascent or larval um, a sort of like narrative fascism in place with scientism leading to medical monotheism. And so the concept is that there's only one true, thing, medically speaking, based on only one view of the body, actually. And it naturally leads to, rendering any opposition to that, heretical. And there's usually an inquisition that follows. And we're already seeing that in my space, because in
Mhm.
quote natural medicine, which is kind of an absurd, sort of like redundancy, to me, that there's something really like new, quacky, weird medicine called taking petrochemical derivatives and patenting them and then introducing them into the body and causing side effects, therapeutic actions in a certain context. That's primarily xenobiotic medicine, and that's the default now. But natural medicine is obviously hundreds of thousands of years old. But anyway, so I feel like what we're seeing in terms of this present operation unfolding is already latent within the way that we already worship the scriptures of the Holy Church, of what is essentially eminence-based and not evidence-based medicine. So you go to the CDC's website, they pronounce it's truth by proclamation, vaccines are safe and effective. And there's no reference to the Cochrane collaboration, which is relatively independent, although not any longer, because they accepted money from the Gates Foundation, and now things have imploded when their founders left. But the reality is, before that, they were saying Cochrane database reviews on, say, flu vaccines, there's no evidence at all showing them safe and effective unequivocally for children, for adults, for elderly, for those who work with the elderly. And yet that was health policy, is you have to get it. And anyone who questions it is a quack, is dangerous, and should probably be put in jail or their kids taken from them. That's like literally the narrative that's been spun over the past few years. So I'm not that surprised by what's going on, but it is disturbing to see them literally lock down travel, the market's imploding. This is a real agenda we're seeing unfold before our eyes, but it's been in the works, I think, for decades, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced that it's a conscious agenda. I think that
How about the reptilian overlords?
yeah, I mean, if you want to make it a conscious, for me, to make it a conscious agenda, I have to locate the consciousness outside of actual human beings, in the realm of myth, or collective consciousness, or beings that are composed, like um, the collective psyche, beings that are composed of human beings and that operate on a more etheric level. And so that in that sense, to affix the blame or the conspiracy on reptilian overlords, extraterrestrials or demonic powers, is kind of, in a way, it is aligned with what I think, that what's happening isn't in literal objective 3D reality as we know it, or as we've conceived it. and this gets, into down some really mysterious rabbit holes, but it liberates me in my thinking because I don't any longer have to decide which of these narratives is objectively true, and I can hold them separately. So Stella today, was talking about this YouTube video where the lady is claiming that it's that the coronavirus is a cover story for illness caused by the 5G rollout.
Yeah, I've looked at that.
Yeah, and so there's these data points, that supposedly a big 5G tower was put in Wuhan in China, and it's all the places where the virus has been breaking out. That's where 5G has been implemented. And like there's this whole narrative. And my skeptical mind was like, really? Well, isn't Shanghai even more advanced in 5G than Wuhan? Why didn't it break out there? And I thought Moscow was rolling out 5G. Why didn't it break out there? And, I had all these objections in my mind, but I don't know. Yeah. Does anybody who's researched this really know the state of 5G rollout in Shanghai?
I think Alexa probably has a better chance of knowing. The NSA and Alexa would probably know.
Yeah, who knows? Like, I don't know. So here's a narrative, and then there's these other narratives, and the way I hold them is and then the standard narrative too, and minor variations on the standard narrative. So I like to hold them and see who I become as I inhabit those narratives and how I see the world. Do I feel helpless? Do I feel activated? Do I feel defeated? Do I feel despair? What view of human nature does it induce in me to hold these different narratives?
You remind me of Walt Whitman in Leaves of Grass, where he says, I contain multitudes. It's sort of an orientation to experience of being, or being human, or whatever you want to call it, which is one of the modes that you're talking about, where we can potentially inhabit all these different narratives and feel them. I really appreciate that, because there is always latent within each thought form an entire dimension, a whole world of feeling. And some of them are just sort of like in the basement, pulling the strings. But, I like what you're talking about. It's kind of phenomenological.
Yeah. For you, though, like it's not just like this philosophical question, because your career, your business, your enterprise has been affected by censorship, right? So it's not theoretical.
Right, but I don't prefer the description of my focus in terms of business terms, because the reality is I live in, like everyone else in this country, I have children, and I got into, my advocacy around health rights and vaccines because I had children. I still have children. I'm in Florida. There's a bill right now that would basically force them to be vaccinated, and everyone else in the state, if it goes through, or we take them out of school and then we're homeschoolers, and before you know it, like Pan said in California, it's like a breeding ground of infection to, be in an alternative school like a Waldorf or homeschooler. I mean, this is literally program level stuff we're seeing, and the rhetoric. So, but yes, my platform has been profoundly attempted at censorship in last year. I mean, it was basically kicked off MailChimp, which sounds like a ridiculous platform, but it's enterprise. It's based in Atlanta, Georgia, and they're CDC Foundation partners. So they're legally, as I understand, required to forbid any communication on their platform, which is, quote, anti-vaccine, and that means just questions vaccines or posts a JAMA study that indicates there could be some harm or it violates that narrative. Another thing I just wanted to say real quick is that this concept of like one narrative that runs all narratives. I mean, this is what we're talking about with scientism, that there is just one true view. That's what I love about what you just said, is that, as a microcosm, if you're able to hold multiple perspectives and not only just tolerate them, but feel them out and see who you are. I want to know more about that, honestly. Like, where does that come from? When did you come to that? Is it in a book of yours?
I mean, I kind of touch on it in various books and some essays. and maybe in the metaphysics course a little bit. But usually I only go deep into that territory in small groups. Or maybe I just haven't fully developed it yet. It's really hard for the modern mind to grasp. Excuse me. It's hard for the modern mind to grasp that reality isn't an objective thing outside of ourselves that can be verified, that can be, excuse me, that can be verified or rejected through an impartial process of matching theories to evidence. Like, that reality is, it's out there, and I can believe one thing and you can believe another thing, but only one of us is right, or none of us is right. But we can't both be right if we're in contradiction. Like, it can't be correct that vaccines are the greatest medical innovation that has saved millions of people and protects us from these scary infectious diseases, at the same time that it's that they are ineffective, dangerous, and take the credit for the decline of infectious diseases that should be attributed to other causes like public hygiene, or the decline in virulence of viruses as they co-evolve with human beings, or something like that, right? There's these, which one's right? They can't both be right. They're totally contradictory. Like, the modern mind wants to figure out which one is right, because then I know what to do.
Well, that's ancient too, right? It's Aristotelian logic. A cannot be not A. And when wasn't Orwell talking a little bit about holding these contradictory realities simultaneously and sort of double think, although he meant it in a very shadowy way, that that's what we're required to believe, that, these absurdities, like love is hate, war is peace, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, this is related to doublethink. Boy, I have to really think about that one though to go into that.
Well, in the case of coronavirus that we're kind of experiencing, I think we're agreeing that on some level it is vapor. It's a common cold virus that they're trying to, I know this is already probably triggering, trying to foment into something that looks like the next plague. And, for reasons that appear to be to control people. And by the way, it was Foucault that talked a lot about biopolitics, which I think is a better explanation for pharma as a transnational meta, sort of society, because what is it, hundreds of thousands of people employed by them, versus profit motive. I mean, that's so old school, like, oh, they're just making a killing because of profit. And it's not about that anymore. It's really more about control. And that's what I'm really most concerned about.
Okay. So I think that this is another thing I said in the essay. I think I just, in one sentence, but maybe I want to unfold it a little bit right now. In a way, on a subtle level, the narrative that this is a deliberate plot serving an agenda, like a deliberate plan that and you said, like, you didn't say that you know that it is, but you said, if it's not, boy, they're sure doing a good job of making it look like it is a conspiracy with that, whatever that was, 201, what was that?
Event 201.
Event 201, yeah. But there's something comforting, just as there's something comforting in facing a threat that we can identify and kill. There's also something comforting in seeing this as a conspiracy or a conscious plan. Because then there's something that we can fight and kill. Metaphorically,
like,
at least.
Iteration, yeah.
Yeah, here's something we can dominate. Here's something we can resist. Here is a bad thing. And the solution to the problem is to dominate or destroy or defeat the bad thing, which is the same mindset as the standard medical pathogenic model of disease.
Yes.
There's a bad thing. So that makes me a little suspicious of this narrative that they've been brewing this and now they're going to unveil it because they want to control us. Like, what if it's just happening because conditions are right for it, just like a virus takes over your body because conditions are right for it. This is one of my understandings of flus and colds. They're actually kind of doing you a service because you're familiar with this, but maybe some of the listeners aren't. The idea that you are eating food that's not good for you, maybe sugar, you're building up these toxic waste products, and eventually like the virus comes in and cleans them up and burns them off with a fever and makes you discharge huge amounts of mucus, which help excrete these, and you're sweating and like, right. And then after you,
yeah, I mean, I can give you biomedical validation for that statement. Yeah, through exosomes.
Right. So I'm not just making it up.
No, I don't think so. But that was the long view of the forest floor metaphor, which I think I love. It's a terrain-based. The terrain is, the environment determines.
Right. So, extending that metaphorically to our society, maybe we have a terrain, we have a physiological condition, like in the social physiology, that makes us really susceptible to a hysteria, like the kind that we have right now, or to the meme of infectious disease.
Yes.
And if that's the case, we don't have to posit a deliberate plan, a deliberate totalitarian agenda, which in a way is like even more scary, because at least if there's a deliberate agenda, we know what to do. We can expose those fuckers, we can take them down, but just as we can kill the germ. But if it's not that, then what do we do? Like, what if it's just happening?
Well, this is such a great point, because it's like a xenophobia and we're self-quarantining. So it's the ultimate, sort of co-opting ideology that you're pointing out. It's not so clear, and yet we're, in a way, administering it to ourselves and stocking up, and we're afraid to cough, and we're wearing masks. Like, in the Middle Ages, they had these big, long, disgusting, horrific beak masks that were going to protect the doctors from bubonic plague. And it's just it's sort of a reiteration of that same theater at this point, because the masks don't even work. They've already validated they don't work.
Yeah, and do the biocides work that they're spraying everywhere? I thought.
Yeah, right. They work to cause profound dysbiosis, which leads to greater susceptibility to things like viral replication.
But viruses are pretty hard to kill.
Right. You don't have to kill yourself, because here's the thing. There's a whole new view of what a virus is, which is they are basically a byproduct of hijacked exosome production. So cells produce these nanoparticles. They just happen to be the same exact diameter as viruses. They have these little same lipid surfaces. They're like these little balls, and they contain actual viral DNA in them. In fact, that's one of the explanations for what HIV is. It's just a hijacked exosome within a cell. So it doesn't mean that you can't send a bad text message to someone. Like, there was a friend I had in California. No, sorry, it was Hawaii. And they got this text message that there were intercontinental ballistic missiles they were going to land in 30 minutes, and her whole family freaked out. Everyone in the country freaked out, and then it turned out to be completely a glitch. That's what these sort of end exosomes that are hijacked can do to other cells, is freak them out. But it doesn't mean they're intrinsically bad. They're there to send vitally important genetic information horizontally in real time, which confers profound adaptability to the species, because the old view was it took 200,000 years or more to change a nucleotide.
Right. So this idea of the separate genetic self that's locked into the nuclear DNA, this is totally obsolete. We know that horizontal gene transfer is happening all the time. Cells, bacteria, using viruses, you write about microRNA. Yeah. All these exosomes, like bacteria, like actually joining together and having bacterial sex in a way, like exchanging genes, introns, all these and this isn't just some random thing. This is part of how life works, how life communicates with each other, how life forms a cohesive whole. So one thing that happens as we institute these policies of insulation and antiseptic isolation and control is that, and these spraying campaigns, and I don't know, for me, even like excessive hand washing and all that, like we're interfering with this communal sharing of life. And you spoke about the microbiome and dysbiosis. Like we're maybe inadvertently worsening the ground conditions that would make us susceptible to infectious disease, but I think more to the point, make us susceptible to those diseases that we can't control with control, the autoimmune diseases, allergies, things like that, that there's no enemy to fight because it's the body turning against itself.
Well, and the reality is that the new biology has shown us that there is something even called natural autoimmunity, which is a default layer of antibodies that are formed against self-structures, some of which actually help to activate nuclear programs. So it's almost a different way to understand what these autoantibodies do, some of which are to basically extend our genetic capabilities several orders of magnitude higher in complexity than would otherwise be the case. So much of what we thought was pathology is actually not. And that's more true than ever when it comes to viruses. The discovery of the virome, a lot of the work done at NIH actually has shown that, it's like the hygiene hypothesis. Without certain basic childhood viral infections and exposures, such as chickenpox, measles, the immunological self-tolerance doesn't develop. It actually has to happen that we go through a period of being, quote, challenged. Otherwise, the immune system blows back on itself. So-called adaptive humoral immunity, TH2, is already set, ready to deal with these defenses. And challenges. If they're not present, then that immune system tends to blow back on itself. So it's really interesting. The absence of, quote, infection may lead to cancer, cardiovascular disease, autoimmunity. So
didn't I read somewhere that can't remember where I read this, that when people get the measles, it makes cancer go away or something like that.
Yeah, well, there's actually studies that you can look at that they literally inject measles into tumors, and they're called oncolytic viruses. They literally cause certain tumors to die. So, the reality is that viruses are essential for immunological homeostasis, self-tolerance, maturation. And if you think about the picture, you're destroying life. That's what we are. We're part virus, and we just gotta, in fact, what is it? 8% of our protein coding genome is actually retroviral in origin. The scariest of all terms is a retroviral. And then even the way you said, like with, all these retroposones and all these little parts of the genome constantly jumping around, they're basically like viruses. So our very genome functions in a very viral way.
So you're basically saying that that the worldview that sees the world as full of enemies is really misleading.
It serves primarily a political function, and it has almost no evidence to support it any longer, thanks to, again, the discovery of the microbiome, thanks to the first draft of the Human Genome Project being completed in 2005, where essentially we went to the post-genomic era and realized that environmental exposures, nutrition, all these things are the primary determinant in our health and wellness and our genetic fitness. It's not pre-coded from distant ancestors and just automatically set up to do this and that.
Yeah. I appreciated you mentioned some of this in your book, which, I'm kind of familiar with most of this material. As I said in our last conversation, which was ruined,
But
by external forces. One of the it's and I guess I'm like totally shifting tracks here, but one of the things I really enjoyed was the discussion of um, uh, nuclear chemistry, transmutation of elements. Nuclear chemistry, for those listening, means um, uh, as opposed to normal chemistry where the no elements change into other elements, and it's just a matter of exchanging or sharing electrons or ionic and covalent bonds and things like that. Nuclear chemistry involves transmutation of elements, like the nucleus of the atom is changing, losing protons or neutrons, or gaining them, changing into other elements. And this is not supposed to happen outside of stars and hydrogen bombs and nuclear reactors. So one of the things that you trace in your book is this entire lineage of scientists who have done this research and proposed that it actually is happening inside of cells, inside of biological systems. And I'd been a little bit aware of one of these researchers, Louis Kervran, but apparently it's part of a whole tradition. And I guess to segue from our last topic into this, just that we're like collectively taking step by step into territory that was considered not even real. Like, the idea that evolution can happen through horizontal transfer of genetic information and not only through random mutation, like that was heresy only 20 years ago. That was considered like Lamarckism. You can't acquire some characteristic and pass it down. And so here, and now it's become more and more accepted. The idea of a virome. I mean, the research you cite on your website it's coming from, standard journals. Like, yeah. It's not just like this alternative stuff. In fact, none of it is. Like, everything on your website is coming from a peer-reviewed journal. So this is relatively well-established territory. But one thing I appreciate about your book is that you're taking a step into more, into, the farther reaches of the new sciences. So thank you for doing that. And do you want to say anything about?
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's part of, I love your language of going from the old to the new story. In biology, like you said, this concept that, there's this Weismann barrier where you can't transfer genetic information from the nucleus, right, beyond messenger RNA and then protein. That was overturned in ways with the discovery of reverse transcriptase. I would say, the retrovirus inserts, information directly back. That was 71. But only a few years ago, a study came out showing that somatic cells transfer microRNAs, which actually are master regulators of our entire genome, to germline cells. This was a rat model, which then gets carried on into the progeny. So that also is clearly Lamarckian, and
right.
Not that surprising because Darwin was a Lamarckian actually. So it's like the
right.
economy.
Yeah, Darwin wasn't really a Darwinist. He was actually a very humble and brilliant genius. Yeah.
It's like Jesus really not being a modern day Christian either, it's or Buddha, a modern day Buddhist. So anyway, so yes, we're at this amazing turning of the ages. I love some of the calendrics of the New Age, if you will, but I do feel like we went through the Kali Yuga. In 2000 is like this event horizon where you see just this grand flowering of new concepts and ideas that actually better match what was always there. It's like in Zen, you always already are enlightened. It's not new. We are quantum biology right now. Our bodies are operating at a quantum scale as well as a macro scale. But what you point out with Kervran's work is that several 100-year history of these astute naturalists observing things like in Brittany where the chickens are laying all these calcium-rich eggs. They can't figure out where the calcium's coming from. till they observed that it's pecking this silica-rich mica and apparently transforming it into calcium. And through some unknown process, right? Because as far as we understand, conventionally, you need very high temperatures and high pressures to turn elements into one another. But what's so interesting is that you have the work of Fleischmann and Pons, right, when it comes to cold fusion. And of course, they didn't follow protocol and announced it to the media before the scientists could basically shut them up and kick them out of their tent.
They got a little excited about it.
Yeah, they were pretty
Yeah.
excited because, you know, but if you go back and you look at the studies and you see their reproducibility throughout the world, it's really amazing. There's a whole low energy nuclear transformation community that has been fighting against the sort of church of scientism around, or you know, conventional physicists and biochemists around this not being possible, even though it's probably happening at any given moment in any living system, you know, on the planet. And so I'm obviously not a nuclear chemist, and I'm shocked that there isn't more discussion about this, but I can tell you that there's some very clever Russian physicists that seem to have figured out a mechanism, right, by which these protons and neutrons are being changed through wet and warm systems. And there's a whole new burgeoning discipline of quantum biology that's doing the same thing, which is trying to understand how quantum processes are operating to make our bodies do things like smell, you know, make it possible for robins to circumnavigate the world, you know, quantum angled photons, and even all these different processes like light harvesting complexes in plants apparently must somehow take into account, you know, a relatively large amount of variables through quantum processing to be so efficient. So there's a lot going on here, but fundamentally, what I find most fascinating is something like an air plant that is like growing on a copper wire. I don't think we necessarily have to stretch the imagination to observe the things around us and observe, for example, in the mitochondria, that there's a inner mitochondrial membrane electric field strength of 30 million volts per meter, which is equivalent to a lightning bolt discharge. That's how intense that is. The cytosol only recently was found to have 15 million volts per meter. So where's that energy coming from? I think that the best obvious answer is from the quantum vacuum, because that is where you get energy. And you know, sometimes people will say, well, that's impossible. You can't get something from nothing. Well, there's billions of adherents to the Big Bang theory, which is that you get a very big something out of a very small nothing. Right. You know, I think that we're on the precipice of this sort of conversation being legitimized. I'm hoping that the actual scientific community, you know, takes this, you know, further. For now, I'm just happy to report on some very interesting things that seem to be out there already.
Yeah. I wish there were more like scientifically literate reporting on some of these things, you know, because a lot of them they haven't really been collated into a form digestible to educated lay people. Like there are these papers out there, you know, there are these Russian physicists here and these, and their job isn't to popularize it, you know, their job is to do the research. So I think
Karl Marx's of the scientific community to create pamphlets and
or the Sayer G's, you know, like this is like, I really I appreciated those parts of your book that were a bit more speculative. It's just fascinating, you know, and even though like, so speculative, like one of the things you mentioned is cavitation bubbles that generate, you know, star-like temperatures and accelerate protons to the relativistic speeds necessary for nuclear fusion to happen, or to knock loose nucleons, you know, like this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, maybe, but you can't, you know, like, it's not like you were proving or that it's necessarily even been proven that this is happening. There are these experiments that give us reason to think that it could be happening. And for me, that's kind of enough to at least know that if I'm following these trails, it's not like totally at odds with reality, with scientific reality. Like, it's not like that. I refuse to believe that reality is divided into two parts, one of which is scientific, verifiable, measurable, quantitative, and the other is forever beyond the bounds of those ways of knowing. I'd like to see a reunion of reality that heals the modern dualism that has caused so much damage. So I have a question for you that I wanted to ask. I've been wanting to ask. So you have this transmutation of elements. You have chickens. In one of these experiments, they measured all of the calcium. They incinerated the chickens afterwards and put them through a what it's called, a spectrometer. They measured all of the calcium after and before, and there's more. Where did the extra calcium come from? And it corresponds exactly to the amount of silicon that was lost. Like, they have these things. So the point being, and you give lots of other examples of ways that that maybe cells can produce boron or whatever. Okay, so let's say, the body can manufacture everything it needs, even the elements that might be missing from the diet. At the same time, you're publishing articles about how important it is to get your boron, or to get your this, or to get your that from the foods that we eat, and the deleterious effects of eating food that has, through industrial farming, has been deprived of its nutrients. So my question is, well, what does it matter? Why can't we just make our own? And this anomalous energy production, you're saying, like, the electric field strength of a mitochondrion or a cell, you can't explain, like, there's no way that ATP is going to produce that much energy. Like the sugars that the cells are using to make energy, no way. Gerald Pollack also did this math. He critiqued way back in a book on the cell. He critiqued the pumps and channels model of cellular physiology, and by one thing that he did is he added it all up, like all of these ATP dependent pumps for all of these metabolic processes. He's like, really? Like, that's an awful lot of ATP. Let's do the math, and there's nowhere near enough. Okay, so we can get energy that's not from food. We can get the minerals, the elements that's not from food. Well, why do we have to eat food in the first place? What does it matter what our diet is? What has to happen for these capacities to really be unlocked?
Yeah, great question. I mean, absolutely. I think in an ideal world with an ideal body, I think a number of these capabilities are being manifested in a way that's much clearer than in the modern world. So I do believe, yes, that there are.
Because animals starve to death, Animals starve to death. They can be malnourished. Plants can be malnourished. If this actually works, then please explain.
Well, I think that's what is so interesting to me, is that the anomalies that do exist. I mean, you have an entire global community of so-called breatharianism followers. And there's an interesting documentary that I recently watched with Kelly. It's, I think, called Let There Be Light. And it documents these individuals. It's very convincing. And Jerry Pollack was the one who first told me about this Indian man who is believed to have not eaten or drank anything for something like 70 years. And he was in a hospital for almost 2 weeks. They observed and validated that he didn't. So if one human can do it, theoretically all humans can. I'm very interested in that, as sort of a case study. But I don't think many of us today are in optimal health nor fitness. And I imagine that it's not available to all of us at the same degree. But it was Thomas Bearden who wrote about this, about how, you see these examples of a Shaolin master like running up a wall and just sticking there. It's almost like one of these geckos with their Casimir plate-like feet, harvesting the quantum vacuum. And his point was that everyone has this energy flowing through them, like with the mitochondrion example, multiplying 30 million volts of potential energy times trillion, you have trillions of cells. You can't even do the math. But that masters learn to direct that energy, transduce it into this dimension. And I think there's something to that, you know.
So I don't have to eat do I have to eat my Brazil nuts or don't I?
Really good question. Selenium is so important, obviously. And yeah, I think given the toxicant exposure, you know, of the Anthropocene, not to mention non-native EMF, I mean, this is unprecedented what we're experiencing. I imagine we need all the support we can to transform light, energy, and information into programmable matter. It's probably a difficult feat. I believe the mitochondria are doing it. You know, in the book, I referenced the Army scientist Samuel Goldfein's work, supposedly proving that mitochondria function like cyclotron particle accelerators, transforming light into matter. That's fascinating. So, but, you know, outside of optimal conditions, I'm not so sure. Or intention, maybe it does have something to do with intention.
Yeah, because like, you know, polar bears can get malnourished, you know, orcas can get malnourished. They can get like, so it's not necessarily that we've fallen from a state where we can do that. Because in the animal world, if, you know, animals don't eat, they starve. So they're not producing all of their energy from breath or from light. So there's a mystery here because, you know, I could take those data points and say, so therefore the breatharians are all frauds and so on and so forth. I don't believe that either, but I guess I haven't come to a comprehensive narrative that holds all of these data points.
Well, I think the one I like most came from Rudolf Hashka, and he said that there's two streams of nutrition. There's an earthly one and a cosmic one. I believe the cosmic one he's referring to was called ether. You know, you could call it the quantum vacuum, 0-point energy. You call it Shakti, Prana, Chi. I think that is accessible, but it takes certain type of discipline, intention, mastery to extract it. I don't personally feel like I have that other than what's available to me intuitively. But you're a martial artist, so maybe.
No, not really.
I don't know. I've seen some videos of you doing some pretty intense stuff with
what?
blocks.
Videos of me?
Maybe Kelly showed me the block. That was cool.
For a while, I was doing this Qigong practice with,
That's what
it's like very hard practice, hard as in external, like striking myself with objects and things,
yes.
which I loved actually. And the only reason I'm not doing it now is I moved away from where my teacher was, but it wasn't for martial arts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, talk to anyone who's been on a plant medicine journey. I think they'll tell you that the world is primarily energy and information and not physical stuff. So that's a type of confirmation that not everyone will have in this life. But for those who have experienced it, it seems like a more reasonable explanation of what's really there. So
yeah. I want to see. We're probably getting close to the end of our time, but I wanted to say something, to name something that probably actually applies to the people who would have already stopped listening in consternation, but I'll say it anyway, just to name how polarizing many of the topics that we've been speaking about are, especially the vaccine topic, where, and then to follow that with this conversation about nuclear transmutation and breatharianism and stuff, it offers the opportunity for somebody to easily dismiss as cuckoo nonsense pretty much everything that you're saying, you know, with the device of, well, he believes in so-and-so, or he's an anti-vaxxer, and to lump anti-vaxxer together with believer in breatharianism and nuclear transmutation, and sounds like you're denying the theory of evolution, and like to construe things in that way to make you look like this idiot. And that I see as a bigger problem, like that tendency to reduce and write off other people, which is really to dehumanize them, and to make them into an enemy, to group them into the category of bad. That is a bigger problem than anything else we've been talking about. It's a bigger problem than vaccines. It's a bigger problem than coronavirus hysteria. It's a bigger problem than any of these things. Because like we could be wrong about our opinions. How would we know if we were wrong? And if you disagree with what Sayer's been saying, audience, if you disagree with what Sayer's been saying about vaccines or whatever, how do you know that you're right? If you use the device of writing off as idiots or charlatans those who hold an opposing view, or as unscientific, or as whatever deprecating idea or epithet that you deploy toward these people. If they're right, how would you ever know that when you won't even look deeply at what they're saying because you already know that it's bullshit? Like, and to universalize this question, I'm sure that some of my opinions are wrong about something in the world. How will I ever know that? And how will the Shiites and the Sunnis ever come to peace when they just each know that the other side is, following the ideology of Satan or whatever they think? And how will, or the Christians and the Muslims, or the Hindus and the Muslims, or the Jews and the Palestinians, or the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, or the pro-choice and the pro-life, or like just take any of these polarizing issues, whether it's in medicine or outside of it. What's it going to take for us ever to come into unity? It's going to take a different approach to knowledge than trying to decide who's good and who's bad. And so I want to invite anyone listening, if you're like hold to mainstream views about vaccines, for example, and you've listened this far, I want to congratulate you. It is no small thing to hold a listening when something that triggering comes up. Like if you're capable of doing that already, even just to stay in the room, that reveals a certain cultivation that you've had. And because honestly, I have my opinions. I haven't actually revealed them in this conversation, what I think about vaccines. You could probably guess, but I have my opinions, and some of them might be right, some of them might be wrong. The truth might be more mysterious than any of us have any idea of. And so for me, this is like the meta issue that underlies all other issues, the issue of polarization and what needs to be sacrificed to discover truth.
If I could just add, Charles, that what I love about your work, it's sort of encapsulated for me in the phrase, which I actually made part of my wedding vows, which is the more beautiful world our heart knew is possible.
The more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Yeah.
Because it's really, to be fundamentally true that when we engage in conversation where there is an other, where someone is either right or wrong, it's an important layer. I engage in it all day long. But when it comes to the dehumanization part, I have to catch myself, because there is a they that emerges, and I start to find myself getting upset, and I feel like they're trying to hurt me or someone I love. But fundamentally, we can all agree that it comes from a place of being afraid that something we love and care about will be taken away. And what I want to do, what I think you're trying to do is facilitate an experience of openness where we can really fall back in love with something. It could be anything, but something, it could be a pet, it could be food, it could be the world, hopefully, certain aspects, because without that direct experience of something beautiful, I don't know that there's no hope, honestly.
Hmm.
Because I'm not here to be right. I mean, I wouldn't have written this book if that were the case. I know there's going to be plenty of people that would be jumping all over me for just referencing some odd phenomenon. But I'm so happy I did, because it's what I get excited about. Like, I believe in a future where we can extract energy from water and create elements from water. And I think that the research by Mark Leclerc, a nanotechnology specialist, is super compelling. So if I've just introduced that possibility into the discussion, and then people can jump on that and just refute it all day, I'm happy, because I do think that we are really close to extremely beautiful vision emerging. And I think you're really one of the fundamental pollinators of this vision. I would like to play some role. And I hope others listening will too.
Maybe you could uh, give us a list of, maybe between 5 and 10 links to some of the most fascinating out there research. It's kind of a big ask because I know it takes time to find like the gem, but the couple that you just mentioned, I'm really interested in.
Yeah, totally. Like, Mark Leclerc, former Lockheed Martin nanotechnologist, has a company called Nanospire. And his presentations on water cavitation and everything he discovered regarding inducing stellar nucleosynthesis-like event in his lab, preceded by micro black hole formation that caused radiation poisoning in him. And
Wow.
there's some fascinating story. His YouTube videos are incredible. So
Well,
he's
you can just send me some things and I'll put it in the description.
all right, cool.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that gets me excited. And of course, Foster Kimberly Gamble with Thrive 2, probably very controversial. I'm interested to see what they do with this release, because they're also really into getting so-called, free energy or 0 point energy out. And it could be completely a hoax, but I mean, I would hope that there's some truth to it.
Oh man, I have like a whole thing about free energy. Um, uh, Again, it's not the right question isn't whether it's objectively authentic or not.
You don't think so?
That is a question you can ask, and I'm aware of some of these realms of exploration, but there's a deeper question that I would love to explore with you sometime, but I don't want to. It takes like really like 15 minutes to really lay it out.
I'd love to hear it actually at some point. The only other thing with regenerateproject.com is where I'm going to be reporting on things like bioremediation of radionuclides through bacteria, for example, or transforming plastic with oyster mushrooms like stamina. Like, I want to find solutions that are evidence-based, validated, that hopefully will help with a new vision of the world. That's.
Did you read about the fungi that are growing like inside the Chernobyl reactor?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mentioned in my book, because melanin is such an important thing, I think, for us to know about, for sure.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. I think I just want to put in one more little thing about the polarization topic, just that again, like I said, I have my opinions. And sure, I would like people to agree with my opinions. I think the world would be better if everybody agreed that the war on terror should end, or that, holistic medicine should be funded, or whatever. But more important than that, I would like us to become less identified with being right. Because in these polarized discussions, whichever one of us is right, which could be you and not me, what's it going to take for the person who's holding on to a damaging illusion to let go of that? What's it going to take for the truth to come out, for us to embrace the truth? What do we have to let go of? Yeah, and I just wish that I wish that we would take up that question. And I guess I have some answers to that question, but I want to put it in this conversation right now just because so much of what you've talked about, Sayer, is super controversial and triggers those reactions of dismissing, dehumanizing, which are leveled at you all the time. If you look you up on Wikipedia or something, it's going to say all kinds of bad things about you. So, and just to circle back, like that explanation for why Sayer disagrees with what is so obviously true, well, he must be some version of bad. That's the same mindset as we were talking about with the war on germs, the war on terror, the war on the conspiracy, Illuminati, like all that is part of the same mentality. And fundamentally, the transition, the initiation that humanity is going through right now is into peace. It is in all dimensions, letting go of the war mentality, which says improvement and progress and well-being comes through conquest. Conquest of the terrorist, the enemy, the germ, the controllers, conquest of Sayer G, intellectually vanquishing him, writing him off, getting rid of the bad people. Yeah, that's what we need to heal right now.
Like that. Amen.
Yeah. All right. So we'll put your links and stuff on the description. And I don't know if you're going to use this conversation for your own nefarious purposes, but you're certainly welcome to.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm just stop recording.